Good morning and welcome back to the combined pre-press lecture from Fullerton College's Printing Technologies Department. These are classes Print 75 and Print 77. This is your instructor, Ben Hewitt, and we're here today to talk about the PIA's pre-press training manual, module 2.3, image editing software. Image editing software is a great way to dance around not saying a copyrighted name when in fact we all know what we're talking about. Let me give you an example before we dive into what it is. This is like when you say facial tissue, but you really wanted to say Kleenex, or you say photocopier, but we all wanted to say Xerox because this really means Photoshop. So we're going to look at a couple central issues to image editing software and the types of files it creates, the types of files it does not create, what it can do, what it cannot do, where are the limits, and figure out what it is and where does it fit in our toolbox of capabilities that we can use while creating and composing documents. Image editing software. This might be really basic to you guys, so feel free to tune me. I'm just kidding. Listen to the basicness again. So basically, any sort of photograph contained on a computer is a grid of tiny squares of color. These tiny squares are called pixel. It's short for picture element. And if you zoom into any image close enough, it's all built out of little tiny squares. They're all perfectly square. They all line up in a perfect graph paper grid pattern. They can have, depending on the amount of memory supplied to the program and supplied to the file, they can have anywhere between an on and off switch of white or black, or all the way up to millions or billions of possible color variations per individual pixel. And a picture is built up out of hundreds, hopefully thousands, maybe millions of pixels to make an image that looks good to your eyes. It's basically a mosaic, but done digitally instead of out of tile on the wall of an ancient temple or cathedral. Moving on. So pixel images are called resolution dependent. Resolution dependent means when you're discussing how big the image is, the number of pixels inside still matters. So if you take a pixel-based image and you zoom in on it, you see bigger pixels. So if you guys watched my semi-unrelated Blade Runner video before this, and I talk about the biggest lie in Hollywood, well, here it is again. Let's recut this and see if we can't improve Harrison Ford's experience to be more accurate.
It has 224 lines.
There we go. We've enhanced it. We've made it bigger. Part of my not fully scientific crackpot theories as a digital imager, but there is a certain amount of entropy involved in digital imaging. You start out with a perfect picture, or as perfect a picture as you're going to get. And the only place you have to go is down. You can only get worse. You cannot take a photo and enhance it. There is no taking a picture that you took sloppily and then through the magic of Photoshop zooming in on one freckle on someone's cheek and making it look anything but this. In the end, when you zoom in, the pixels get bigger. So let's make this back to full screen. We'll move on. So what that means is when you make the image bigger, you lose quality. When you make the image smaller, you gain quality, but you lose size. Resolution dependent size means how big is it? The answer to that is another question, which is, well, how many pixels per inch are you using? Because your picture may tell you that it's like 40 inches by 37 inches and it's this huge, almost square, but in the end, you might only have 100 dots per inch, in which case, really, it's not that big when you try to print it to get good quality. So it's resolution dependent. The number of pixels involved can be divided however many inches you want by how many per inch you want to get your size. But if you make it bigger, you suffer by getting less information in your image. Let's move on. What they don't do, image editing software, Photoshop does not make vectors. Vector graphics are illustration software things. I like how illustration software is even more of the facial tissue to Kleenex problem. Illustration software, does that sound vaguely like Illustrator to you? So vector graphics are the domain of Illustrator. Vector graphics are creating shapes using mathematical lines and perfect points and lines and curves to lines so that your shape is exactly the right shape and can be scaled to any size you want without the loss of quality. We'll talk about it more later on because I kind of love vector. But Photoshop does have one limited vector capability, and here it is. You can create paths, and a path can be used to make a clipping path. Also, technically speaking, if you have text, text is vector information these days. So if you're writing anything, you know that you're using vector info. But a clipping path using the pen tool is the right way to do it, by the way. There are lots of ways of deleting the background from an image. So if you wanted to cut out a picture, get rid of the photo booth was shot against, or if there's one person you want to isolate on the white background, but they were taken in a real photo in a real place, you don't want the baseball stadium or the parking lot in the background anymore, so you want to cut them out. It can be done pixel by pixel with an eraser tool. You can try to use the magic wand tool and have it delete pixels around it by a percentage of difference in color, but that always looks kind of grody. No matter what you do with those, it leaves a bad edge. If you wish to have perfect edges, you use the pen tool and you draw that path and you use math to define a perfect end to your image. And even though the image is done in raster, sorry, it's another word for pixels, even though your image is done in pixels or raster imagery, when you drop that vector on top and use it as a cookie cutter to cut out the background, you can have the crisp perfection of vector mixed there with your photorealism, hopefully, if it's a good picture, of your pixel-based imaging. Clipping paths are great. I like to use them. Expect to do some in my class. Even if you've done them before, it doesn't hurt. So here's another way it looks. So when you don't use a clipping path, you put this orange on top of the word orange, you get that white square background around the orange, and everybody is sad because the client and you were really hoping for that picture on the right. So when you draw that perfect line around the edge of the orange, you get a perfect edge. Even if the pixels would have shown kind of jaggedy and looking like it's made out of Legos on the edge otherwise, you get the perfection of that clipping path, cutting pixels in half and getting a perfectly smooth, curved edge. For all you Mandalorian fans out there, say it with me. This is the way. That was me pausing to listen to you. Hopefully you said it. So what image editing software actually does do is you adjust images. Basically, anything you do in Photoshop is math still, but it's a different kind of math. The math of Photoshop is the math of calculating numerically based color values of each individual pixel. You can go through one at a time if you zoom in far enough, and you can click and change individual pixels. But all the filters, all of the cool effects and things you can do in Photoshop, making it lighter, making it darker, increasing contrast, decreasing contrast, all those things you do is simply applying a mathematical formula saying, darken the picture by 6%, and the computer will go through, and for each individual pixel in that image, it will apply the formula that the filter was going to give you, and by 6%, darken each specific individual pixel. Depending on what types of math you're having it do, or how complex the filter is, this can take some serious processing power from a computer because it has to do this process for sometimes millions or billions of pixels if your image is high quality and large size enough at the same time. You can adjust color balance. You can make it shift towards the cyan or towards the magenta or towards the yellow. You can make it washed out or more saturated. You can change the image mode from color to grayscale to duotone, which we'll also talk about later. You can retouch flaws if it was a scanned photo and the original photo printed on paper, sorry, developed on paper, had a tear or a scratch to it. You can, in Photoshop, fix that. You can apply special effects to images. Just a moment here.
Yeah, but your scientists been so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they just don't think they should.
So yeah, just because you can do this doesn't mean you should. There was a time when this was super cool, and it is kind of tacky. So unless you're using it to create something more complex, a simple Photoshop filter oftentimes is going to make things look less finished and less professional rather than more. Putting images together is another good thing you could do. You could take pictures and put things in there. I'll need to find the digital file somewhere. I have a great picture I took of my wife and I back when we were dating at Disneyland. And the point of this is I didn't take a picture of us. I took a picture of her. She took a picture of me. And later on, I put them together into one picture later on. And it looks pretty decent. It's a way of getting a group photo with people who don't get along. Of course, we get along. We're married. But I mean, people who can't, if you don't have enough people to take an extra picture, you can go in and just shoot each other and then go ahead and put yourselves together later using Photoshop. This is also a huge thing for family pictures. So if you have a lot of kids going on in it, and if we were doing an extended family photo, there's always at least 2 or 3 kids who aren't looking, but one who looks perfect in every photo. So you take like 17 pictures and you go through and find the one where each kid is looking and you put them all together into one finished one. Or if you work for the Iranian defense industry, you use Photoshop to make your defense industry look better. This was a famous one from a bunch of years ago now. I don't mean any offense, or maybe I do, but only on their Photoshop skills on this one. Because to try and make it look like they had more missiles to launch to scare the world, they Photoshopped some missiles. And if you look closely at the missiles here, you can see that the, see, I'm going to my mouse to bounce here for you. It's the same dust cloud twice. And if you look at the trail of fire and smoke off the missile, you can see it's the same missile with a little bit of the other one mixed in to make it try to look like there's an extra one. So people can tell. Even the uneducated or the uninitiated, those who don't know Photoshop well, can tell by looking at a picture that, hey, that's the same thing more than once. So when you're putting images together and composing them out of multiple smaller ones, it takes a certain amount of delicacy to make a good-looking image. The common types of files for this, you'll find that TIFF and JPEG are the biggest ones. You can save as PDF, EPS, Photoshop. A lot of programs now, like InDesign and newer Quarks and things, will support a direct linking to a Photoshop file, so you don't have to convert it to a TIFF or a JPEG. Although I still like to output them properly because, I don't know, I've got this thing about not having editable files mixed together, where I like to have a finished version of something put into something else, just so you don't accidentally retouch it without realizing it. Because the worst thing you can do is accidentally mess up something that was already good. So TIFF is good, JPEG is meh, but it's common. You're going to get a lot of them from people. We'll talk about that later on as to the good, the bad, and the ugly of JPEGs, and I'll do one of my epic name drops because I actually know one of the people who helped invent the file format. Features, you can often change a lot of different formats. Photoshop has a lot of them. Half of those are proprietary, but they're all really good. There's PDFs is always a good choice. PNGs are out there. There's a new one that's showing up for web use called WebP, and I don't know how to quite deal with it yet. I'm still adapting myself. There are plugins available. I think it's existing so you can't just take internet images, but maybe there's a real reason, but that's what it feels like to me. You can go through, and some of these are more editable than others. Some of them you can go through and make fixes to. Some of them you cannot. So choose wisely, but we'll talk about this later on as to what they actually are. Available software. There is more than just this, by the way, and I'll show you real quick. You gotta be careful with Googling it though, make sure Safe Search is on. So there's Photoshop, which is the end all be all of graphics. And there's CorelDRAW, which is honestly a good program, and it's kind of awkward because it's half photo editing and half vector illustrating. Kind of strange, huh? There's also a freeware program out there, although I'm hoping you guys are all using actual Adobe because you need it to be able to do my class. You could also get, for freeware use, the GNU image manipulation program called the GIMP. Be careful Googling that. It's good. It does everything Photoshop does. It's high quality. Professionals do use it. It's free and open source. The difficulty if you're used to Photoshop is it'll feel like cooking in someone else's kitchen where all the tools are there, but you're not sure which drawer has the spoons because all the tools are moved around for copyright reasons. Anyways, that's it for this chapter. We'll talk again soon.